I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties still. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends Verity and Ellie wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover, and even then, I'd sometimes be known to still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We were not a sorority house or team house or anything like that, just 4 friends renting a house together. I believe it was a Adam Sandler party that we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily at our house and then called an Uber, which we all split. On the Uber ride there, we pre-gamed some more, which was a recipe for disaster. By the time we showed up to the party, I was borderline blacked out. I barely remember the layout of that house. I'd never been to a frat party besides that night. It's weird, I have short spans of memory from that night. I vaguely remember the outside, that there were a bunch of frat guys standing out front of the house, and then I remember the DJ in the living room and the 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remember before waking up sleeping on the grass on the side of the road. In a daze, my head was throbbing. I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was laying by a bunch of trees, like a wooded area apart from the university. There wasn't much up there besides woods and the occasional little town. There were a couple of light posts further down the road, so I wasn't just laying in complete darkness. I patted down my pockets looking for my phone and had a meltdown when I realized my pockets were empty. I was also missing my crossbody bag. I had absolutely nothing on me and started to freak out. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or where I was. I looked around the immediate area by where I was sleeping, nothing. My white shirt was stained with dirt, but that was the least of my worries. I started walking down the road closer to the light posts and began to realize there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road. I leaned on the light pole for a few minutes, wondering what to do. I decided I'd wait for someone to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time, though at least 20 minutes, before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms and jumping, trying to ensure I got their attention. The cars slowed to a stop on the side of the road. I approached the car, and the guy inside rolled down the window. Once he asked me if I was all right, I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in, and I did, making sure to let him know how much I appreciated it. He, of course, asked me about my predicament, how I found myself stranded on the side of the road. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should not have said any of that. I should have been as vague as possible and not let this guy know that I got completely trashed and was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I told him I lost my cell phone too. I looked back at him for a second, and this was the first time I really analyzed his features. He was about 40, not the best-looking guy, with a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address to put into his house as he drove. He put the address in, and then I heard him say under his breath, "Okay, here we go." I asked how far away we were, and he said about 15 minutes. That sounded about right since the frat house was about 15 minutes from our house. I thought things would go smoothly, I'd get dropped off at the house where Ellie and Verity would be waiting for me with my belongings. But nothing can ever go that smoothly. The man spoke in a gentle voice basically the entire time. He was asking basic questions. At first, his soft voice was almost, in a weird way, off-putting, like why was he talking in an almost whisper in the car? We drove on and on for what seemed like over 15 minutes on the same road. I started to get concerned and asked him how much further we had. He didn't respond right away, so I said, "Sir," and he went, I repeated my question, and he said in his soft voice, "Not far." This wasn't right. Our house is in town, yet we were still on the same back road with nothing but trees everywhere. I started noticing in my peripheral vision that he would look at me multiple times, like he'd move his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds and then look back at the road. I was starting to feel sick. I asked him if he put the right address in, and he said yes. Then he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" as he put his hand on my knee and started rubbing it. I moved it away and told him in a desperate voice to please not hurt me, I just wanted to get home safe. He said, "Why would I hurt you?" After saying this, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park. He was about to lean over towards me and do something, like put his arms around me, but I didn't let him. I opened the door and ran into the woods. Luckily, I was wearing my Air Forces, so I didn't have a hard time running in the woods. I ran only just enough to be out of sight from the car. When I could no longer see its headlights, I heard the man for the first time raising his voice. He yelled into the woods, "Where you at?" "I just want to." I put my hands over my mouth, not only to muffle my breathing but because of pure fear. I waited and waited until I heard a car door slam shut and the sound of a car speeding off. I waited a few more moments before walking back to the road, confirming he was gone. I felt truly helpless. I didn't want to run into that man again, but I also needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come, and eventually, one did. I saw the headlights approaching from afar, but I waited until I was sure it was a different car before jumping out and waving my arms and yelling. The car came to a stop. It was another man, a little older. I sat in the back seat. This time, I was so shaken up that I hardly spoke apart from answering whatever questions about my predicament he asked. Thankfully, this man dropped me off at the house. It was like 4 a.m. at this point. My friends were still awake waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were contemplating calling the police if I didn't come back by morning. No one had any clue who I left with or how I ended up on the side of the road. The boy I was with claims he wasn't the one who left with me. In fact, there's no solid proof that I even left with anyone, but that leaves no explanation for how I ended up sleeping on the side of the road. I cut back heavily on the drinking after this night and never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike. This happened back when I was in college. Spring break had just ended, and I was driving from my parents' house back to my college dorm. The drive itself was about 3 hours. There were a few small towns on the way, but other than that, it was pretty much just endless fields. I started my drive late, around 10:30 p.m. I was still making my way out of the town my parents lived in when I saw a hitchhiker walking on the side of the road. He was a tall, skinny guy carrying a duffel bag. As I got closer, he stuck out his thumb. I honestly felt really bad for the guy, and seeing as he was walking in the same direction I was going, I rolled down my window and asked if he wanted a ride. He named a nearby town and asked if I was going in that direction. So I told him yes and unlocked the door. He got in the front seat, and I realized right away that he was a lot older than I thought, like, at least in his 40s. He kept to himself for a good part of the ride, which I actually didn't mind. I had the radio on, so it wasn't just awkward silence or anything. It wasn't until around 20 minutes into the drive with the guy that I started to think I made a mistake. The guy started clutching his stomach while groaning and complaining that he didn't feel well. He pretty much just hunched himself in the passenger seat, swaying back and forth. I told him to feel free to open up his window for some fresh air, but he never ended up doing it. To say I felt uncomfortable would be an understatement. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand if the dude wasn't feeling well, but here I am driving while just next to me is this guy groaning and swaying back and forth. There weren't really any towns or rest areas nearby. I didn't want to just tell the guy to get out and completely strand him in the middle of nowhere, so I kind of just sat there, trying to focus on the radio. This went on for another 15 minutes when the guy said, "Dude, I really don't feel good. Can you take the third next exit?" This caught me off guard. Not the part about wanting to stop, I was more so expecting him to say that at some point, but the part about the exit. The guy specifically said, "the third next exit." I remember those being his exact words. In the moment, I obviously thought it was weird. If I myself were sick, I would be much quicker to want to just pull onto the side of the road or at least take the very next exit. I asked the guy if he just wanted me to pull to the side of the road real quick, but he sternly told me no. This should have been a clear red flag, but I ultimately reasoned that the specific exit he wanted me to take must have had a rest area I was unaware of, so I agreed. A few minutes later, I took the exit, but absolutely nowhere in sight was any kind of rest area. I started pulling to the side of the road when the guy said, "No, keep going. We should go down a bit further." Again, this should have been a red flag I picked up on, but I did what he said. Eventually, he told me to stop. He got out and, within seconds, disappeared into the darkness. I waited for the guy to come back for a few minutes when I saw 5 hooded figures walking towards my vehicle, only revealed by the light of my headlights. They were clearly carrying weapons and now charging towards my vehicle. I threw the car in drive and started darting in the other direction, but they actually started shooting at me. From what I recall, 5 gunshots were fired, 2 of which hit the back of my car. Even still, I was able to get out of there. I didn't stop the rest of the way back. I did call the police and report it, but I never got any follow-up. When I made it back to my dorm, I found the bullet holes in the back of my car. I think it's worth noting that one of them was only a couple of inches from my tire, which makes me think whoever was shooting was aiming for the tires, but I'll never be able to know for sure. I don't fully know the motives of that hitchhiker that night, but at least to me, it's obvious he intentionally lured me into that specific spot, which, might I remind you, was nowhere near any type of civilization. I have since never picked up another hitchhiker. It was a rainy night and I was driving home from my shift at the late-night diner I work at. It was a quiet shift at work. I had a weird amount of energy still, so I knew I was going to have to pop a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There are occasional little parking lots with cute little strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, and then just stretches of nothingness. And by nothingness, I mean forest. I was passing one of the aforementioned parking lots of a well-known deli, and under a light post was a woman standing out in the rain with her arm held out. She was waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman who appeared to be in her 50s, maybe. This woman was really tall, like 5 feet 11 inches or 6 feet, but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door and opened it, chanting how much of a hero I am. I asked where she was heading, and she said just up the road to town. She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet, but I like to think of myself as a good person and I couldn't, in good conscience, leave another woman out there in the cold rain. However, picking up a random man on the other hand would be a different story. The woman seemed sweet, but I noticed as I looked at her while talking to her that she was missing a few teeth, very, very off-putting. I had to now wonder if she were homeless. She didn't smell or look like a homeless person, though, but the rain soaking her and her clothes could have been masking any scent temporarily. Plus, her hair was so wet that what may have usually been scraggly undone hair could now have been weighted down and straightened by the water. Either way, the woman was smiling the whole time and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump, might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside. I was really doing my good deed for the week. She said, "No thanks, honey," so I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and some spiked seltzers since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot real quick, but it was tiny, she was gone. She must have run off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV and was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment, which is the first level of a two-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked, then the 2 doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in out of the rain and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin, though, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was kind of going wild with thoughts, a lot of thinking about that woman I picked up earlier and what happened to her. At certain points, I heard slight sounds from outside of my bedroom, but I dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. Boy, do I wish I had been more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually would never happen when I take a melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up, feeling drowsy and really thirsty too. I reached over the table next to my bed for my water, and then I saw and heard something across the room from me. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser, with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating it. I shook my head violently and made weird noises. I even slapped myself in the face, and now whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream, I didn't say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity for a bit after the figure was gone was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room after this, no footsteps, not the sound of a door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him what I just saw, and he said, "Carter, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I was continuing to become more awake. I left my room and turned on the lights to the living room outside. It was a small space, there was no one in there. I looked around the entire space and could confirm no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinated, but still, I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. Last night, what I saw, was it real? I did another look around the apartment, confirming no one was inside. I went out to my car and opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat, and that's when I noticed the damp yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back, and my blanket that I always had back there was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in the gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment, or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said, check and make sure nothing was stolen, and if nothing was, then calling the police really wouldn't do anything. I checked the house and didn't find anything to be missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was just genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there for much longer after that, and so after that month, I found a new place to live. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.